welcome to Brookline Interactive Group's cable show, The Safety Net. I'm Susan Howard, a local attorney here in Brookline, where they focus on family violence and also right now, refugees in the Ukraine. But with me today is Francesca Korbas, attorney, who is the Director of Educational Advocacy and co-owner of Vested Advocates. Welcome, Francesca. Welcome
Thanks,
to the
Susan.
Safety Net. Welcome to Brookline. And tell me a little bit about educational advocacy and vested advocates. What does all that mean?
Okay, so educational advocacy, specifically, our team is a team of special education advocates. So individuals who guide parents and counsel them through the special education and 504 processes. Those are the processes under the law that provide parents and the children of those parents with special needs with the rights to access the services they need to accommodate their disabilities in public schools.
So how does that work? You're a former special education attorney and mediator, but now you're a mogul. You founded an organization, you founded a company. How does that work? In other words, if the town cannot provide the services, you access the services and the town pays? Is that what I'm understanding?
So special education attorneys typically step in when things between the school and family have gotten so contentious that things can't really get resolved without a third party, and or the family or the school has filed a complaint with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, which is the body, the legal body that handles legal disputes between families and the school districts. Advocates and attorneys can play a role before things become litigious with schools. So advocates and attorneys can often do the same type of work with families to resolve conflict before it ever gets to a more adversarial place. However, when attorneys are in the room, there's a different tone that's set just by reason of them being an attorney. And I experienced that despite the fact that my background in mediation and my work counseling families was more unique. And I really came into those types of conversations with schools with a much less kind of adversarial role. I really tried to empower families as opposed to step in and really formally represent them. So I had a really great referral partner who owns an academic coaching and college consulting company. And him and I came up with this idea to fuse our passions, because he also primarily works with families of children with disabilities or learning disabilities. And we created this non-legal practice. So the advocates in our practice are former special educators, mental health professionals, learning specialists, literacy specialists, reading specialists, people who've worked with students with all different types of needs. And they counsel and coach parents through the advocacy through the special education and 504 process in a non-legal role.
Wow, that's a mouthful, and that's a lot that you're doing. Parents and guardians should be involved in special education eligibility. Can you briefly tell us what the eligibility is? How do we know if somebody's eligible?
So if there is a child, if the child is suspected by someone in their life to have a disability that affects their ability to make progress academically or social emotionally in school, that person has the ability to request an evaluation on the part of the school to see if that child qualifies for special education services. And there is a determination that needs to be made by a team of individuals at the school to see if that child does qualify. And there are a number of factors based on how that disability affects their everyday life and their ability to access education and their need for kind of more specialized supports by teachers who are qualified to provide those supports.
Francesca, what are the factors? I know nothing about this. So what would be some of the factors that people should look at? Say a parent should look at and say, gee, I don't think my child is performing.
So there's a number of things. And, you know, we really, especially from my experience previously and the team of advocates that I work with, we really, really encourage parents to be proactive. So even if your child is not getting D's, if they just seem to be not accessing services the way they should, if they appear withdrawn, if they appear to be in conflict a lot, or are getting kicked out of class, or are not are disorganized and are not getting their homework in on time. Just, that parent instinct, that guardian instinct is really the first thing that should trigger a parent to seek help or to start becoming part of the process. And it can mean that there's nothing that the school might be seeing yet, but the parents know. And that's why I emphasize also the social emotional piece, because if a child is having mental health related needs or behavioral things that aren't necessarily related to what their grades are, those are still things parents should look at, because legally that families do have the right, when the child is eligible, to get services for that child that aren't just academic supports. They can be social emotional supports.
It's the first thing that if a parent notices that a child is withdrawn or not interacting or is getting, as you say, dismissed from class, should they ask, first of all, the school to do an evaluation? Is that the first step? And then once they have the evaluation, I assume that the school and the parent or the guardian have a conversation or some sort of a meeting of the minds, or not a meeting of the minds. I mean, if the school comes back and says, no, there's nothing wrong with your child, it's developmental, he's just overly energetic, whatever.
Sure.
And then after that, what is an IEP?
Okay, so the first question is, if I recall, you said, what should the parent, can you repeat that first? So
Yes, the first thing I would say as a parent, let's say I'm the parent, I'm going to ask the school for evaluation. They do the evaluation. I'm going to give you two scenarios.
Yeah.
Let's assume the evaluation comes back and says, no, there's nothing wrong with your child, Susan. That's first. And I think there absolutely is, and I want these services. That's scene number one. Scene number two would be, yep, there is something wrong. What do you do then? In other words, there is and there isn't.
Okay, so if the family requests an evaluation, I would encourage the parent to get involved from the get-go. So they're going to say, oftentimes parents can access outside support, even if it's just a consultation with a pediatrician or a mental health professional, hopefully someone that can provide some type of support to that parent from the get-go that allows them to get a little more leverage with the school. And, at any time a parent is beginning this process with the school, this is where my team of advocates would typically step in. We are very, very about getting proactive. So again, involving kind of some outside resources is really helpful, and doing that strategically. So maybe not inundating the school with a ton of materials, but giving them enough that gives the school a little bit of assistance. And then oftentimes we can strategically work with families, or we can coach families on how to be involved in that evaluation process, because basically the school has to review all different things about that child to make a decision on whether or not that disability affects their school performance. So if you have stuff that you think could help them, the evaluator kind of make that assessment. What you should do is kind of gather those things and make sure that that the evaluator has those materials to kind of within his or her full picture. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they will make a decision based on the information you give them. It just gives them some more. And in terms of the outcome of the evaluation, if you don't agree with the outcome of an evaluation, that's where so this is very, very school determinant. And this is, again, where oftentimes we work with families to say, is this the type of relationship is the school giving you the type of response that means that they're open to further conversations, that they feel like maybe they didn't assess the right things, or they're open to assessing other areas of potential disability? Or are they do they have a guard up and they seem to just be very dead set in what they've decided? Because if that's the case, maybe there should be an independent evaluation that
I was just going to ask that. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. All of this goes into the student's file, correct?
So everything
is it confidential?
The child's school record.
Well, let's say the evaluation, the result of the evaluation, the interaction with the parent, the interaction with you and your organization. Does that stay with the child forever? Does it go up the chain as the child goes to the next grade, to high school, to college? I mean, I would have a problem with that.
So not necessarily. So school records, there are the federal law, FERPA, the Federal Education Record Protection Act. I believe that's the acronym it stands for, or something like that. But it's basically the school version of HIPAA does protect the materials that are in a school record that are considered what the school uses and keeps on file to make kind of decisions and to track progress, that type of thing. But there are different things that the families can do to ensure that the record isn't something that necessarily is accessible to anyone outside. And there are release forms. I mean, for someone like me, I'd have to get a release from a family so that I could access the record. But there are extensive regulations around the confidentiality and accessibility of those records.
So, Francesca, let's say that a child is determined to have a disability in need of services. Is the next step an IEP?
So if they are found eligible for special education services, that means that the school now has to create an IEP, which is individualized education program. IEP also stands for individualized education plan, which is the written document that comprises all parts of that plan. And the individual education program means that everything that surrounds creating that plan and employing that plan. So developing the team of individuals who make those decisions, which there are a number of legally required individuals, including special educators, general educators. The parents have the right to be present. I think there's a number of administrative personnel that need to be there, maybe some mental health professionals that are on staff at the school. So there are people who are required to be part of the team. And then that's another strategic part of the parents. Parents can also ask for members to add members of that team. And that's oftentimes what we do with families, is to say, do you have a pediatrician who has a good relationship with you, who could speak to this need in a certain way, and then would be willing to be present to back up what they're saying? Is there a mental health professional who can write a letter about what they've assessed with your child? Is there a tutor outside who's worked with your child on an executive functioning or their ADHD needs? So there's a strategic way to also create your allies on that team as well. And then we talk about also your relationship with the people on the team. But that team then meets annually to create an annual plan for the child. And every 3 years, they determine through a reevaluation whether or not the child should be deemed eligible for services still.
Francesca, does the child's aware that all of this is going on while it's going on, correct? Wouldn't that have sort of a diminishing effect on the child's performance? I mean,
so that's a very subjective kind of concern, and it is a real one. And I think it becomes more and more prevalent on how sensitive a child's IEP is to them, as particularly they enter junior high and high school, because that's when those kind of social aspects kind of start. And especially if that child has a social or emotional need, like if they're autistic, these things can be even more of a challenge for some students, because they don't want to be a spectacle. They don't want to, unfortunately, no kid wants to stand out, obviously. But again, there are ways in which you can design an IEP and have the team aware of the fact that your child is sensitive to being a child who receives special education services, and the goal is to keep them in the least restrictive environment. So in the general education setting as much as possible. And perhaps you can educate the team on how to keep that child from being that spectacle that you don't want them to be, or be, and of course be at risk of bullying if that's the type of thing. And at the age of 14 in Massachusetts, the students are required to be invited and become part of the IEP process. So they have to come up with a vision statement with the team outside of the meeting, or with a counselor outside of the meeting to determine what their ultimate goal is, and what they'd like to do post high school. And then everything that's going to be done to get there is discussed at the meeting, and the student has the right to be part of it. Again, the decision as to whether or not the child to attend is something that we often do work with families on, because while a lot of schools will say the child should be there no matter what, this can be sometimes not the most beneficial to getting services on the IEP, because there are a lot of students who'd prefer to have nothing, and are, again, no matter how much the IEP actually benefits them, like the teen knows, including family, parents and guardians, oftentimes a student doesn't want to maybe be in the room sometimes, or they don't want to necessarily highlight that they're on this plan. And that can kind of affect the the power that a parent can have in a meeting if their child is kind of contradicting what they're asking for, but in their tone and their behavior, because they can oftentimes behave a little bit poorly.
How do parents find out about you? How do they find out about you? Or that they can get help, they can get advocates, that somebody can explain the process to them before they engage in it? How?
So do you mean how can they access us
Yeah.
virtually?
I mean, how would a parent even know that you exist?
Yeah.
I
So
wouldn't.
yeah, so I think a lot of parents have different names that they're given for what someone like we do. So sometimes people call us educational consultants. Sometimes people call us a parent advocate. Some people say, oh, you have to hire a lawyer. So oftentimes it is word of mouth, parent to parent. Parent groups are typically where this type of stuff comes up, CPACs. Groups that are dedicated to specific needs that children have, parents of autistic children, that type of thing. So like I said, there are oftentimes the parents who I have had and worked with who are very proactive are parents who've had more than one child who with special needs. So they just know the process a little bit more, or they've had a family member, or they themselves have certain needs that they just know that it's good, or just by reason of what they do professionally, if they're in the legal field or in the advocacy field, they just have an idea of when they should, which is unfortunate, because obviously it would be wonderful if families could access us earlier, and that is something that we are dedicating to getting the word out to families, and that this is something that if you access it earlier, it benefits you in the long run. You develop a good relationship with the school if possible. You don't have to keep accessing people when you come in crisis. You can have a fluid kind of streamlined relationship with the school. So like I said, right now it's from everything that we've experienced, it's a lot of word of mouth, or people who just have a knowledge base already who come to us early.
What about pediatricians? Would they recommend an advocacy group like you, or would that be a good place for parents to start? Gee, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Often people go to their pediatrician, people go to their dance instructor, people ask their child's yoga teacher, people ask actual teachers in the school, and there are teachers who may say, you might want to consider having an advocate president, and parents will say, what's an advocate? And then they'll say, well,
exactly.
So parents can start anywhere. Parents can ask if they have a neighbor who has a child who they know gets some special services at school. That's a good place to start, to say, how did you, I don't even know where to start. Who would I go to? That's how I've actually worked with a number of families, is through neighbors, people who have referred me to people, locally in different towns and that type of thing.
I substitute teach adolescents who have some sort of mental illness, and some of them, and they're in a hospital setting, and some of them I've come to find out are referred by DCF, which tells me there's another side to the story, because I do DCF appeals. I'm wondering, do you work with DCF? Do you work with the juvenile court? Do you work with, or do you just work with sort of plain old general folk who have children with disabilities?
So typically we have families that access that, families or guardians, people who have legal custody of a child, come to us, and we work with that family, basically coaching and counseling them to give them the skills to do this in the future. I have worked with state agencies and federal agencies before, doing child welfare related work and education related work, but that typically people who work to ensure the placement of kids in school through like the state agency that you referred to, from my understanding, it's more people who work within the organization to ensure that the court agrees with a placement that DCF has or a state agency has decided should be where the child is, and placement, school placement, special education placement, that type of thing.
Francesca, this is all new to me, even though I am a former teacher. And in the last couple of minutes, what would you like parents or guardians or the public to know, and how can people reach you?
Okay, so what would I like the families of people to know?
The one
that
thing
you
you
have,
think, yeah.
Parents have power, families have power, and anytime that you have a gut instinct that you don't want to agree to something, or you don't think something is right, you have power, and you have the ability to obtain information that can assist you in asserting that power. And the system is, as much as it can be intimidating, and much as schools can feel like an intimidating environment, they are full of people who really do want to help. And it's getting across to those people who are also dealing with other challenges, and to make sure that the picture of what you want is heard, understood, demonstrated, and it's all about framing it. So you have power and you can assert it. It's just, sometimes you need a little bit of extra assistance. And families can access me via email at fkorbas@vestedadvocates.com. That's FKORBAS@vestedadvocates.com. And they can also access us via our website. And we are located in Norwell, Mass. And we also provide services primarily virtually.
One last question. Do you deal with students of all ages? Because the disability may not go away. Do you go up to college, post-college?
Good
Yes.
question. Thanks for asking that one. Yeah, so something that's really exciting, and one of my favorite parts of our team is that we work with students who up until going to college, university. So one of the things that we like to do with families is help transition students. So work with both families, parents, and students when they're of age to kind of to journey out. So we'll work with students to understand their needs, understand what their IEP and their value, get them on, get them a new neuropsych evaluation so that they can bring that to the school to support what they're asking for, help them understand their rights when they get to school, how to pick out a program that will accommodate their needs. And there are a lot of schools who have really great programs specifically for certain needs, learning needs, behavioral needs, that type of thing. So so that's one of the my favorite parts of our programming, is that we do offer services for those older students as well.
Francesca Korbas, Director of Educational Advocacy and co-owner of Vested Advocates. Thank you so much. If you send in your contact information, we'll try to run it. I hope you'll come back. I wish you all the best. I think you're doing really amazing work. And there's a smile on your face. You're not discouraged at all. Thank you so much. Francesca Korbas, Director of Educational Advocacy.
Thanks, Susan.
This is Susan Howard. That's it for the Safety Net. We'll see you next time.